the tail end of John's appraisal of the waitress. His eyes, cold and rude, traveled the length of the waitress's body. "Nice boy," Estrella had said. Mary knew even now that she'd never have the heart to tell Estrella that nice boys didn't call their dates old and then mentally undress the waitress. Mary was a tolerant person. Perhaps too tolerant, but there were only so many feathers one could stuff into a down pillow before it snowed poultry. "Right," Mary said, mostly to herself as John and the waitress both looked at her to order her drink. How nice of him to pull his eyes from the beautiful baby here to serve him dinner. She turned to the waitress. "I think we need a minute." Mary took a deep breath. She asked herself the same question she'd been asking herself since she'd been old enough to ask it, which, according to John Modesto-Whitford, was probably about a decade and a half too long. Can I continue on? If the answer was yes, if she conceivably could continue on through a situation, no matter how horrible, she always did. She pinched the bridge of her nose. The answer to that question was going to come in the form of what shoes he was wearing, which she hadn't seen yet as she'd arrived at the restaurant after he had. In Mary's experience, men who wore wingtips were a lost cause. Not to mention men who wore wingtips to go along with their perfect hair, perfect tie, and mean eyes. Wingtip shoes were some sort of inscrutable, masculine symbol. She was sure of it. Members of the Wingtip Club probably communicated with one another in secret, smirky eyebrow lifts, effortlessly transmitting information about the women in their general vicinity. She hadn't figured out the why of it. She simply knew it to be true. Men in wingtips were not compatible with Mary Trace. She opened her eyes, ignored his coldly befuddled assessment of her behavior, and flipped up one side of the tablecloth. Mary let out a gusting breath of relief. There they were, size 12, glossy ochre wingtips, recently polished. Thank God. Now she didn't have to worry about whether or not she was doing the right thing when she carefully folded her napkin and set it aside. The wingtips were a clear sign from the heavens that it was time for Mary to get the hell out of Dodge. Still obviously befuddled, John stood when she did. The only point in his favor so far. "Thank you for meeting me," Mary said, and meant it. The jerk could have stood her up, but he hadn't. "But this is not going to work out." His eyebrows aggressively furrowed, changing his face from that judgmental smirk for the first time since she'd sat down. Now he just looked plain old mean. She paused for a moment, expecting him to say something. Anything. But nada. Zilch. Goose egg. His lips just pressed into a thin line as he glared at her. "Have a nice night." She reached for her purse. "You're just leaving," he said flatly, his eyebrows still in that aggressive V over his cold eyes. She straightened her purse over her shoulder. "You've got to be kidding me," he murmured, animating for the first time by tossing his large hands in the air. "What a freaking waste of time." A waste of time because she wasn't going to sleep with him? Apparently he'd gotten all dolled up, schlepped his way across town, and now he expected a cookie. Her cookie, to be exact. After he'd straight up called her old. She sucked in a deep breath and stepped closer to him, not wanting to cause a scene by raising her voice. He stiffened and pulled back from her, as if age were contagious. She didn't want to be rude, but she'd stopped allowing herself to be bullied about a decade ago. Social niceties be damned. Mary tossed her hair back over her shoulders. "I'm not going to say anything to Estrella about this, don't worry. But she was wrong. You are not a nice boy." John blinked at her, his face quirking up into an expression that told Mary that he thought she was a prize idiot. She wasn't an idiot, but she had learned a lesson. This was the last time she was letting a mother set her up with a son.